Hi, Pastor Steve here in beautiful Visalia, California. Today we continue our Bible study working in the story of Abram at the very beginning. If I had to title this episode, I would title it Round One, War of the Gods. There'll be lots more to come. So last week we left Abram and his family out in a place called Haran. They had exited Mesopotamia and they moved to Haran, which was a crossroads in the ancient world, kind of a trades crossroad. And today we will look at the scripture. We'll go through the scripture kind of a little bit at a time, and I'll comment instead of breaking the discussion and the scripture up. But what we'll see is Abram and Sarai and Lot and his wife all headed into Canaan at the direction of God. And I'll explain the remark about the war of the gods. That's a theme that we very seldom talk about in the Old Testament, but as we talked about last week, this is an epic. And in epics, there are almost always wars between the gods. And certainly the Old Testament fits that type of writing and that theme. So we are in chapter 11, verse 32, and it tells us that Terah lived 205 years and he died in Haran. Again, we talked about what could have caused the exit from Mesopotamia. My operative theory, though no one can know, is that at least a part of the reason that they all exited Mesopotamia was that they may have been a part of a group of believers in one God, the God that we call Yahweh, and that would have put them in immense trouble legally at the cost of their lives, and would have been a difficult circumstance to live in, to live in a fertility cult with numerous gods and to believe genuinely that there was only one God. That would have been a hardship. Of course, we can't know why they leave. We're just told that they did leave. So it could have been any number of other things. It could have been that dad retired, and so Abram and the boys and the family went with him. It could have been legal troubles that drove him out. It could have been business since they moved to a trade route. We don't know, but thematically, for me, it makes more sense to chase the idea of monotheism being the spark that caused Abram and his family to separate from the polytheistic cult of fertility that was Mesopotamia. In the city of Ur is where they came out. So they're in Haran, and Terah lives to be 205 years old, and then he dies. The scripture continues then. The Lord said to Abram, "Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you." One more time. Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. Abram is being told to cut himself off completely from his roots, from the culture and the background that he comes from, and to go into the wild, wild west. Canaan, for much of ancient history, really was a place of tribalism and a place that was relatively dangerous, unsettled. There weren't a lot of kingdoms that grew up at this time in history, and so being told to leave everything that he'd ever known and even the definition of who he was and go into Canaan, that's quite a promise. Let's listen to the rest of the promise. God says to Abram, "I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great." How does that happen? Well, more people rather than less people know who you are and think that you're great or think that you're wonderful, or they remember you as the progenitor of the race or of the people. That it takes lots of people and lots of history to get to a place where your name is great. You will be a blessing. That's going to be absolutely true. Abraham, when he has the name change, does become a blessing to many people, not the least of which is Sarah. "I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse, and all the peoples on earth will be blessed through you." It's interesting, right? This scripture was written in this form right after the Babylonian exile. Again, it's written as an epic, but it's fascinating to me. This is written before the Muslim faith existed and before Christianity existed. So the prediction is that pretty much the whole of the world will call Abram great. We're in the midst now politically of trying to see if we can renew what are called the Abraham Accords. And that's because this scripture became concretely true. The vast majority of people on the face of the earth call Abraham their father. That's a stunning and amazing thing. We're so used to it that we become immune to the shock that it should have. This is a no account guy in a great civilization of Mesopotamia, and he records, or his story is recorded over time as being that God promised him that the whole world, right, all nations would call Abraham great. And in fact, in real time, in our lifetime, that's exactly the truth. We as Christians are children of Abraham. Jewish people are children of Abraham. The Muslims are children of Abraham. Abraham did pretty good there in the land of Canaan. And maybe more to the point, the wildly exaggerated, almost impossible to believe promise that God makes to Abraham became absolutely provably true. Let's hang on to that as we go through the study. Okay, if we read that in context, it becomes clear then that God is promising to Abram that he will bless him with immense fertility. Again, this is something that it's easy to skim over, but you don't want to. Immense fertility. He's going into a land that is by and large empty, or at least isn't settled or known for any one type of people. And God is saying to him, there's going to be so many people that your name will be called great. Right? I'm going to make you into a great nation. You're going to be like Mesopotamia, and literally whatever large amounts of people will adore you and call your name great. So in the epic, again, this theme is worth really thinking about. What's happening is God is saying, Abraham, you do what I tell you to do, and we will rival Mesopotamia, right? I will make you into a nation, it doesn't say greater than, but at least as great as Mesopotamia. And we know that the only way that could happen is through hyper fertility. In that day and age, in the human story, fertility was the primary concern of every leader, and everyone. The crops had to be fertile, the animals had to be fertile, and the people had to be fertile. It was necessary to drive population growth. You had to have labor, you had to have people to increase your yields and your ability to produce food and store it. So fertility, that's why Mesopotamia was a fertility cult, with cult prostitution and even the sacrifice of children when things weren't going very well. They believed that the God's greatest gift to them was the ability to increase their numbers in all of those areas. So the promise that Yahweh makes to Abraham is, if you think Mesopotamia is fertile, you haven't seen anything yet. That is, Yahweh can be seen to be challenging the established gods and the order of the day of Abram. Okay, let's go a little bit further. Sorry about that. Let's see, 12. Okay. The other thing to note is leaving Mesopotamia means that Abram leaves the pantheon of gods in Ur and the worship of them and the ways of worship. Now, what we're going to see in the development of Abram in this epic is that he's very Mesopotamian, right? It doesn't mean that he believes in their gods, and I do fervently believe that he at least doubts those gods, and that he's aligned with Yahweh, right? He believes in the one supreme being. But culturally, linguistically, socially, Abram is dialed into what to be Mesopotamian, and we'll see him act in some ways that, as Christians or as modern Jews, is shocking and disconcerting, unless you remember that this is a true story. A Mesopotamian family was culled from those people and sent into Canaan land by God, and there they are going to begin a new people, a kind of what we call the chosen people. But a part of what has to happen in order to accomplish that is they have to have generations that are still living as Mesopotamians, thinking and reasoning from that basic viewpoint, and they have to be taught the things of Yahweh, especially those things that are different than the Mesopotamian faith. And so as we run into Abram and Sarai acting in ways that are disconcerting to us, what we're seeing is the beginning of the separation from a point of view and a way of living that God wanted the human family to leave behind, and the slow introduction of obedience to God and the teaching of God's way. The word for that, or the phrase for that, is progressive revelation. Talked about it last time, and we'll talk about it over and over again. So I would invite you to really let it sink in and think about it. The story is that God took from already civilized humanity, a group of people, and then over a very long period of time, he taught them his ways and his desires. He formed them into his people, and he gave them his law so that they could be a light to all the rest of the people. Well, the first part of that process is to help them progress from being Mesopotamian but believing in a different God, right? Culturally, there's a lot of stuff that's going to need to be left behind, and learning to be obedient and learning what God is like, learning what God desires or what God demands from them. So the process that we see as we go through the patriarchy, the stories of Abram and Isaac and Jacob, is that progression in the coming to understand what this new God desires. It's more than just sacrifice and belief. What God desires is a re-enculturation, or I guess that's wrong. It's not a re-enculturation, an enculturation into living in the way that people were designed to live. So progressive revelation, we're going to learn a little bit at a time as we go with Abram about how God trained or taught or led human beings into being the people that he desired, becoming the chosen people eventually. All right, so verse 4. So Abram went as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old, so very young compared to his father, when he set out from Haran. He took his wife Sarai, his nephew Lot, all the possessions they had accumulated, and the people they had acquired in Haran, and they set out for the land of Canaan, and they arrived there. Well, did you catch the little part there that pricks modern ears? Abram had acquired people in Haran. That means he had slaves. You can clean it up and say, no, they were servants, and imagine something else, but they were slaves. Slavery is an institution as old as culture itself. As long as there have been groups of people, they have been trying to enslave one another. He is Mesopotamian. Slavery in Mesopotamia was like it was in Egypt and everywhere else. It was just normal. It was the way things were done. This is not a defense of slavery. It is a mature and reasoned understanding. Yeah, of course, Abram owned slaves because that's what you did. Apparently, business went well in Haran, and so he acquired some goods and he acquired some animals and probably some laborers, and certainly he had slaves. So we're told pretty clearly there, again, right? He took his wife Sarai, his nephew Lot, all the possessions they had accumulated, and the people they had acquired or purchased in Haran, and they set out for the land of Canaan. So first kind of bump in the road to modern sensibilities, I guess, although honestly, I think we should be mature and intelligent enough to get over the fact that ancient people lived like ancient people. Abram has slaves. He's called out of Mesopotamia, which is a slave society. He goes to Haran with his family, and he apparently does well in business. He acquires more people, which is to say he increases his possessions. And with those people, God calls Abram into the promised land, into Canaan, there to continue teaching him the ways of God. All right, the scripture continues on. Abram traveled through the land as far as the site of the great tree of Moreh at Shechem. At that time, the Canaanites were in the land. Canaanites were tribesmen and nomads and all kinds of kind of the ne'er-do-wells of the ancient world. And the Canaanites will be a vexation to the people of Yahweh all through the story. I laugh because later one of the patriarchs will marry a Canaanite, and that causes all kinds of problems in the family. To marry a Canaanite woman was not considered good. Anyway, those are not important to our study. They're just interesting to me. The Lord appeared to Abram and said, "To your offspring I will give this land." So he built an altar there to the Lord who had appeared to him. Okay, a couple of things on that. building an altar to your God in a foreign land where they worship many other gods is akin to going into a different country and planting your nation's flag, right? It's a declaration of ownership and intent. It means that here we declare we're going to worship our God. And so it is the first concrete step toward the differentiation of Abram and his clan with the rest of the Canaanites and the kind of nomads and tribesmen that ran the land there. Abram has staked his claim in a land that is not his. You should know that there is debate in rabbinical circles and less so, but still some debate in Christian circles about exactly where Shechem is and where this altar was built. Generally, the story is, or the belief is, that where this altar built would eventually be the cornerstone of where the temple comes to be over a great period of time. I have no idea how you would verify that. I have no idea if it's factually true or if it's not. But the belief that grew up that the making of this altar to God defined the land that would become the temple. That makes really good sense in the long history of Israel, which was a temple worship religion, and so it's very important to Jewish people more so maybe than it is to Christians. It just denotes that when Abram built the altar there, the belief is that that land then became sacred and set aside for God because it's where the initial promise of God was made and responded to by Abram. Again, on the historicity of whether or not we can prove that that's actually the cornerstone of what would become the temple, I don't have any idea, and nobody else does. So it's a nice thought to say, well, maybe that was, or absolutely it was the cornerstone of the temple that would come many, many years later. Okay, if that makes you happy, that makes you happy. It's symbolic, and the story is an epic, and epics are full of symbolism. So we'll let that stand and say, yeah, okay, that makes sense. God sent Abram into a foreign land and then inspired him to build an altar there in the place that God was going to eventually occupy and call holy. So there you go. I don't know what good it does you or not, but as far as the story goes, it makes perfect sense. So on we go. From there, he went on toward the hills east of Bethel and pitched his tent with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. And there he built an altar to the Lord and called on the name of the Lord. Then Abram set out and continued toward the Negev. The Negev is a region that was more fertile in the land of Canaan. So things to ponder and things that we looked at today. Abram breaks with the whole of his civilization, and he breaks thoroughly and fully, first to Haran, but when he enters into Canaan, he has left behind everything that had made up his family and his culture until that time. And that fits with the idea that Abram was a monotheist in a time when polytheism was the general rule. Monotheism was radical, and so too were the actions that Abram took, I think, in support of his monotheism, to get away from the culture devoted to all kinds of gods and to move into a place where he could worship in whatever way he wanted to, which is to say, continue to follow this singular God that he had come to know. All of that lines up and makes perfect sense. In a way, you can say this also, that breaking with what has been and then learning to live a new way, that's the story of salvation for everyone in the Christian community. Think about the terms that we use. I once was lost, but now I'm found. I once was blind, but now I see. The idea in Christianity is, even if you're born into the culture of Christianity in your family and maybe your community, you still have to come to a point where you make a free will decision to follow God, and that means breaking with things that you have been doing, thinking, a way of being that you had before, and moving on to a radical, different way of being. This idea that following God comes at that cost of breaking and leaving what has been in order to move into what is promised, that is the essence of the whole of Scripture. So let's see here. What Abram will establish in the land of Canaan is culturally very close to what was in Canaan before he got there. But the manner of establishment and the setting aside of his people and the differentiation between the Canaanite tribes and Abram's tribe are pretty radical, and we'll be getting to those in the next lesson. So this is Scrolls, Stones, and Scriptures, and we're kind of getting into the meat of the thing now. I love the story of Abram. It's just so rich. So you'll know if you're watching these as a Bible study experience. We may skip one or two stories here or there. I'll always tell you if we are. The reason for skipping is just consideration of time. If I did a podcast a week at 20 to 25 minutes, I would be somewhere in my mid-hundreds before we ever finish. So I will give myself permission to sum things up without the in-depth study. For today, know this. Our faith tradition, which calls for us to leave behind the ways of the world, started with a man who left behind the ways of his world. I hope this is a blessing to you. I hope if you enjoy the Bible study, if you're interested, that you'll hit like and that you'll share, that you tell other people about it. If you have questions or comments, the plan is after a few more weeks, I'll try to put together a Zoom where you can come to a Zoom meeting and we'll talk and dialogue about some of the ideas, those kind of things. Remember, this is a Bible study where I'm not insisting that I have absolute truth and know exactly what all of this means. This is a Bible study where I am dedicated to sharing what modern research from historians and archeologists and theologians and philosophers tells us about the story that is central to our faith. So with all of that, have a great day. Thank you. Bye-bye.